All through the Gospels, Jesus appears to us as a teacher. He is frequently called Rabbi, which in Hebrew means my teacher. Not just teacher, but my teacher. A personal bond between the teacher and the learner. And that accounts for our listening to Jesus as our teacher. He taught, part of his method of teaching was to tell stories. Stories that he called parables. Now we know what a story like that is like. It tells us there's a meaning underneath the story so that we get exactly what the teacher wants us to understand. We have stories like that in our public life. You know, the story of George Washington and the cherry tree. It wasn't true, but it was there to tell us that George Washington was such a truthful person all through his life that he couldn't tell a lie. Unlike some of his successors, of course. But Jesus told stories, the stories that we've just heard. And sometimes he took his disciples aside and he explained the stories to them, to understand them more fully. The stories that Jesus tells come from the tradition of wisdom in the Hebrew Bible. Jesus knew the Bible. It was part of his life. He worshipped in the synagogue and took his turn in reading the Bible. And the wisdom tradition of the Bible is something that is presented to us as the ideal of our life as followers of Christ. In the first reading, the wisdom of God is presented to us in this way. He is the Almighty, the all-powerful one. Show the greatness of his power. It doesn't talk about the creation of the world. It talks about the way that God bends down in mercy and compassion to his people, to all of us. The greatest bends down to the least. Jesus follows that tradition when he talks about the kingdom of heaven being like a little seed, a very tiny seed. But from that little seed, something great grows. Or a woman making bread, and she puts yeast, a tiny little bit of yeast in the flour, and it becomes bread. The mission of the Bible, the mission of Jesus in presenting the Word of God, is always to talk about the small things that matter so much. The small things that matter in our lives. In the world around us, it's bigness that counts. If you're in business, if you're making something in business, you need to make a lot. Volume is what counts. If you're making widgets or refrigerators or tanks, you have to make as many as possible because that's the way you make money. Volume is important. But in the frame of values that we have, according to the Word of God, it's the small things that count. It's the small people who count. Jesus was always there for the small people, the people who had no voice. He was the voice for them. The widow who went up to the temple and put 2 little coins in. And Jesus said what she gave was worth more than the big, expensive gifts that people would spend in their worship. So what's the story all about? What does it mean for us? It means, as it does so often in our reading or our hearing of the Word of God, that what counts before God is our inner attachment to him and the values that he presents to us. What is really important to us. That we do not judge by the criteria and the scale of values in the world around us. We know where those things lead. They lead to war and slaughter and injustice, a lack of mercy, a failure to provide for those who need the most. And the message for us is, later on in this Gospel of Matthew, the one that Father Leo repeats to us over and over again, as long as you did it to the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you did it to me. Jesus identifies himself with those who are the neediest. And in that he carries on the great tradition of wisdom. of this world, which so often can lead to death. The wisdom of God, which comes to us in the person of Christ, the one who represents the all-powerful God, but by using small, little images that even the smallest of us, the most unimportant of us, can understand and recognize the value that we have, small as we may be in the eyes of the world, the infinite value that we have before God, the infinite one, because he has placed his Spirit, has placed his grace in our heart. That's the great joy of our worshiping together in this Holy Eucharist. The joy of knowing that we who worship in faith and in truth, we are valued by God. Whoever we are, no matter what we have or how little we have, it's who we are that matters before God. And he asks us to use that same scale of values, those same criteria in valuing and judging one another. That is the source of our joy as the people of God. And that is what we celebrate today. And whenever we come together in this kind of assembly to give our praise and our thanksgiving.